This is my long-term Ioniq 5 all-wheel drive limited review. This is my personal car, which I've done about 11,000 miles on over the past year and a half. And I wanted to make this review because I felt like it would be unique in the sense that I get to review aspects of this car that the normal car reviewer just can't do because they only get those press vehicles for about a week. So stuff like the smartphone app experience, stuff like actual range and charging, stuff like reliability, they can't really touch upon those things because they only had the car for a week, and so that's what I'm going to cover today. So let's get started. So let's just start with the smartphone app experience. Just for some background, the Ioniq 5 was the first car that I had bought that had access to a smartphone app, meaning I went into this having no prior experience. And when I first started using it, I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. Like, I can do quite a few things functionality-wise. There's two apps. There's a digital key app and there's also a BlueLink app. Digital key is based on Bluetooth technology, so you have to be within range to use it. The BlueLink app is basically using the servers, using the internet connection, so you can use that from anywhere. And between those two apps, like I said, there's a lot of functionality. You can unlock, lock, open the trunk, remote climate start, honk the horn, and it feels like it's pretty feature loaded. And in that aspect, I think they did a good job. Problem is, after a couple weeks, after a couple months, I started noticing some trends. And that would be that both of these apps are very, very glitchy. The digital key app, which relies on Bluetooth, is really slow. Basically, it has to reconnect to your car each time you're within range. And what I quickly realized is that it takes sometimes 20, 30, 40 seconds to connect to the car when I'm just standing right next to it. And as far as the BlueLink app goes, well, that thing was even slower because, again, it's relying on the internet connection from the car, and then it's sending commands to the server and then waiting for all that to come back to the car. And sometimes those commands would take 2 minutes, and sometimes they would just time out and not work at all. Based on that experience, it really felt like it just wasn't complete. And unfortunately, Hyundai has decided to double down with BlueLink, because moving forward, if you buy a 2024 model, you get free BlueLink access, which is cool, but it's just not very good. Now, I recently switched to a Tesla Model Y, and I've been using that smartphone app, and that thing, man, that thing blows this thing out of the water. When I press unlock, it unlocks the car, it just happens immediately. And pretty much any command I do, I press it and it happens, which is just not what you get with the smartphone app experience with the Ioniq 5. So if you're coming from a Tesla and jumping into an Ioniq 5 or a similar sibling car, well, the smartphone app experience is going to be, unfortunately, a letdown because it just doesn't operate as quickly and it's not as reliable. But if you're coming into this completely new, not having experienced any smartphone app experience beforehand, well, then I'd say it's not bad. Like I said, it's very feature loaded, and in that aspect, it's nice to have. Next, let's talk about the driver's seat experience, meaning seat comfort. And if you haven't followed my channel recently, well, I have back issues. I have a lot of back issues. I have multiple herniated discs, and that has caused nerve damage going down my legs. And so in the average car, I spend about 2 hours, and when I get out, I am in extreme discomfort. And that discomfort basically turns into a multi-day, maybe week-long recovery process. Well, the Ioniq 5 is probably middle of the pack, meaning after 2 hours, I'm okay. But once I hit 2 hours and a half or 3 hours, and then it starts getting uncomfortable, and that pain will last through the week. But like I said, for most cars, I hit that before 2 hours. And so in that aspect, this is a decent driver's seat. You have heating, you have cooling or ventilation. And so, and for the most part, at least for shorter drives, it's quite comfortable. It's a relatively large, flat seat. The bolsters are not really doing much, especially on the seat bottom. My only complaint, though, is the lumbar support. Lumbar, unfortunately, has this seam going right down the middle. And so when you push the lumbar out, it's basically pushing this uncomfortable seam right into your back, and I can feel it even through a winter jacket. And so I've gotten to the point where I just don't use lumbar support at all. And even then, it's still okay. So if you have back issues, well, this probably wouldn't be considered a comfortable seat, but I wouldn't categorize it as uncomfortable either. It's a very good one-size-fits-all seat. So while we're talking about the seats, this vegan leather has actually held up really well. No stains, no punctures, not even really any creases. It's really durable. As long as you make sure to wipe them down once a month or so and put a protective coating on, they really do look great. I still think they look brand new. And next, let's touch upon the in-car tech. And this again is the limited trim, which is the top spec, and this thing is loaded. It has pretty much every single tech feature you would want in a modern car. It has a full 360-degree camera system, and that is excellent. It feels like it's got an unmeasurable amount of camera views. You don't have really any blind spots if you're using this camera system. On top of that, you got a really good responsive touchscreen that gives you access to the full menus, and the layout and the setup of the UI is good. It's very easy to use. It's very easy to find things. I have basically no complaints with the touchscreen and the UI. Everything is laid out very clearly on the driver's display. So again, great screens, no complaints there. I think the tech here is good. Part of that tech includes highway driving assist. Now the limited trim comes with HDA2. It's supposed to be able to execute lane changes on its own. I think it's kind of whatevs, but in general, HDA is good. It's very, very easy to use, and I think it's excellent in stop and go traffic because it's so smooth with acceleration, so smooth with braking. It mimics how I would drive pretty closely, and the best part is it uses regen for braking, so it's being efficient. Speaking of which, part of the tech is the regen system, and if you've seen my channel, if you've watched my videos before, you've probably heard me say this 100 times by now. This is the best regen system in the industry. This thing has paddles. It lets you instantly adjust regen on the fly. It also has multiple levels. It also has this thing called auto regen, where it lets the car's radar and sensor systems figure it out for you so that you don't have to mess with the regen system. The regen system is the best. It's good enough where I would hesitate to buy any other EV, because I know if I don't buy a Hyundai Group EV, I don't have this regen system. I don't have these paddles, and I won't have control over the regen like I do here. So if you're someone that likes to feel engaged while you're driving and you've been kind of missing that feeling in an EV, well, definitely check out an Ioniq 5 or any of its siblings like the EV6 or the GV60. Anything that comes with this regen system with paddles, it's engaging. It keeps you part of the driving because you control the braking, and well, half of driving is braking. Now, how about the actual real-world range and charging? Well, as we all know, based on specs, this EV is a charging beast. There's basically no competitors in this price range when you look at charging speeds. Like, most EVs are lucky if they can do 10 to 80% in half an hour. Most of them take 45 minutes, and some take even more. But the Ioniq 5 can do it in 18 minutes. And even if you hook up to a slower 150 kilowatt charger, even then you're looking at 25, 26 minutes. So it's better than the rest. Just hands down, that's what it is. Now, in real world usage, then you're dependent on the actual charging infrastructure. And as you'll notice, as you start doing these charging sessions, the chargers are unreliable, they're finicky, and most of the time, something's gonna happen and you may not get these advertised charging speeds. But that's gonna be the case with all the other EVs out there. Now, with that said, let's jump to the range, because the range is also pretty crazy. I would say this is a range beast as well. Where it really shines is in city driving and slow moving traffic. This thing is better than a Tesla, and I mean that 100%. The efficiency numbers that I've gotten here are way better than I get in my Tesla Model Y. That's just how it was built. I think it's the regen system, the way they've tuned it. It lets you do stop and go driving very efficiently. Now, once you get onto the highway, that's where it's probably middle of the pack. So if we just boil it down to actual numbers, my limited trim with the bigger wheels in city driving can do about 330, 340, even 350 miles of city commuting, just pure city commuting. And that's impressive. But if we're talking about pure highway driving, then I would say my max is probably around 280, 290, maybe 300 miles, depending on just how fast I'm driving. There are certain stretches of highways near me that are only 55, 60 miles per hour speed limit. And if I stick to that, I can get close to 300 miles of highway driving. Now again, this is all best case scenario, where hopefully it's not too hot or it's not too cold, so that I don't have to blast the AC or the heat. Once you factor in the weather, things will drop drastically. Meaning in the winter, if you drive really fast on the highway, you might only see about 200 miles of range, maybe even less. And even in the city, if I'm doing daily commuting, I might only see 240 or 250. So take those into account. The EPA rated numbers are one thing, but real world driving is another. And like I said, all my numbers are based off a year and a half of ownership. Today's video is sponsored by Nivion. They sent me their Tesla to J1772 adapter, and I'm actually really impressed. This adapter has worked for me every time, just plug and charge. It also feels very solid, very well built, but best of all, it's one of the most affordable options on the market. Now to me, this is a must-have accessory if you have non-Tesla EVs, like the Ioniq 5 or GV60, because if you plan to charge at hotels while road tripping, sometimes they only have Tesla destination chargers, or maybe the Tesla chargers are the only ones still available. So if you have this adapter, that means you'll never be stuck thinking, ah man, I wish I had an adapter so I could charge. So if you want a reliable, affordable Tesla to J1772 adapter so you can charge your Ioniq 5 anywhere you find a charger, this is a great one to get by Nivion. So thank you Nivion for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to it. Alright, moving on to reliability. And this is an interesting one because my Ioniq 5 has been perfect in terms of reliability. Literally zero reliability issues. It's never left us stranded. It's always started. It always charges. The HVAC always works. All the major components have been flawless. And if you look through a lot of the forums, you'll see there's a lot of people that have had to have their heating or cooling systems replaced, that have had fuses blown and replaced, the ICCU system that's managing your charging replaced. Again, I don't know the numbers. It feels like it's a decent amount of people that are having these issues, but at the same time, there's a lot of owners there that have had zero issues. And I would fall into the group of having no actual major reliability issues. So for me, over a year and a half, this car has been perfect in terms of reliability. Now, that's not to say that we haven't had issues, because we've actually had a lot of small issues. Check out my channel. I've got what feels like 30 or 40 videos documenting all the little issues that I've had, and that segues into our next category, which is servicing. Servicing is a very difficult topic because it can vary just so much depending on where you live and what kind of dealerships you have access to. My understanding is that over in Europe, servicing is actually really good. Most people have very, very good things to say about their dealership experience. Here in the US, I think it's a very, very mixed bag. My experience has been, like I said, a mixed bag. I've had a lot of little issues, and when I take it in for service, it feels like no one really knows what they're doing because they haven't had this car to service for very long. It feels like at the dealership level, the service advisors, even the techs, just don't really have much experience with these Ioniq 5s or even EVs in general. And then when you move up the corporate chain to customer care and you contact them for more help, again, it feels like they don't really know anything about EVs. And it's just kind of a circle that we just go in over and over. I go in for service with issues, I come back out, things for the most part are not fixed or not resolved. Now again, I didn't have any major reliability issues, so that wasn't, too bad. But still, having these little issues constantly unresolved made it difficult for me because I have to keep on dropping it off. That's the other aspect of servicing, is how close are you to a certified Ioniq 5 dealership? For me, my closest one is about an hour away. And each time I service, I drive an hour, I drop off the car. Luckily, they provide loaner service, so I can take a loaner car and drive back home. But then when it's done, then I gotta repeat. I gotta drive to the dealership, drop off the loaner, pick up my car, and go home. So that was already 4 hours of driving for one service visit, only to find out, oh, they didn't fix anything. So we got to go back and do this again. And that was happening multiple times. So I think servicing is something you have to consider when you're buying the Ioniq 5, because at the dealership level, it's going to be difficult for them to make repairs. The hope is, though, that things will get better. As they have more Ioniq 5s to service, as they get more experience, they'll know what they're doing so that they can make repairs and fixes within the very first attempt. So one thing I forgot to mention was service appointment waiting. We've had our Ioniq 5 serviced now about 4 times. The very first time, I had to wait about 30 days before I could get into the dealership. That was just the only available appointment time that they had. The second time, I had to wait 45 days for the next available appointment. And the last 2 service visits, I had to wait 60 days each time before they could see my Ioniq 5 for servicing. And you know, the hope is that more dealerships will get Ioniq certified so that they can work on our cars. But at the same time, anytime there's a recall, anytime there's a new software update that has to be done at the dealership, those wait times will balloon up. I've heard people that have had to wait 60 to 90 days, especially if you need a loaner vehicle and you can't just leave it there, or if you can't sit there and wait a couple hours. If you need a loaner vehicle, expect that you're going to wait probably 2 months on average for a service appointment. And kind of also along the lines of servicing and reliability, I wanted to talk about actual fit and finish / build quality. And overall, this Ioniq 5 to me is really, really well built, especially when you consider it's the very first model year and they've never built anything like it. From the inside, we never had any squeaks or rattles. From factory, this thing was solid. Now, when I took it to the dealership for servicing, they were readjusting a hatch, which I'll come to in a second, but they created a rattle when they were doing that. Otherwise, my car was dead quiet and should have stayed that way for the 1.5 years that we had it. Now, as I mentioned, that liftgate issue, that was a panel gap that came like this from factory. And the issue is that the car was built in South Korea and then shipped over, and in the US, at least at my dealership and at the corporate level, they could not address this panel gap issue because they didn't know how. They tried to adjust some of the hinges and some of the stuff in the trunk and the back, but no matter what they did, they couldn't make it any better. They could only make it worse. But other than that, on the outside, this thing looks fantastic. I don't have any issues with the fit and finish or panel gaps anywhere else. And the good news is that for 2023, I haven't really noticed any Ioniq 5s with that same weird panel gap. So hopefully it's something that they've already addressed from factory. And if that's the case, you're getting a really, really well-built EV from Hyundai in this Ioniq 5. Now, the last thing that I wanted to cover in this long-term review is the actual trim recommendation, meaning I bought a limited trim, but should you? Let's talk about that. So currently there are a couple of trim models you can choose from. At the very, very top is the limited trim. Moving down, you have the SEL, and then the SE, and then the standard range SE. Now, I think if you're coming from a kind of considered luxury car, meaning if you're coming from something like Lexus or BMW or Mercedes, you're going to want the limited trim because it's going to have comparable technology and it's going to look about as nice, or at least close to it. Once you move to the SEL or the SE, you start losing things like no ventilated seats, like no 360-degree camera system. You also eventually turn into cloth seats at the SE level. Those things in and of themselves are not bad, but at this price range, it's a little hard to wrap your head around paying, I think, $40-something thousand for cloth seats. That's just, I don't know, that's a little strange to me. And I think a lot of the value of the limited trim is the fact that it's so loaded. It has, like I said, almost everything you would want. And so for me, I really wanted all those creature comforts. I wanted the glass roof. And so I went for the limited trim. But if you're the type of person that doesn't care about all the luxury features, doesn't even want a glass roof, well, the SEL and the SE are really, really good cars still, because they have the best of what the Ioniq 5 has, meaning the same charging, the same battery, you have the same regen system, you still have HDA, and those things are honestly, to me, what make the Ioniq 5 so good. Oh, and the last thing before I forget, regarding the sound system between the different trims, well, we had an Ioniq 5 SE as a loaner for about 2 months while our Ioniq 5 Unlimited was at the dealership. And during that time, I got to drive them and just daily use it. And actually the speaker system in the SE is about the same as the one in this limited trim, which makes sense when you consider the speaker count. This limited doesn't really have that many more speakers. It's not like a 14 speaker system. I think it's only a 7.1. So based on that, you got to remember, with only 7.1 speakers, it's only going to get so good. And that's kind of what you should expect with limited trim. It's just not that good. It's not bad, but it's not that good. Alright, so that, I hope, covered a lot of topics that the normal car reviewer just can't cover because they don't have access to a car for a year and a half. They typically only have it for a week. And like I said, my goal here was to go over things that hopefully you want to know more about, but the typical review just can't cover. And so that is my Ioniq 5 all-wheel drive limited long-term review. Now, if you're still in the market for an EV, as it happens, we also own a Genesis GV60 Performance as well as a Tesla Model Y. So make sure to hit that like and subscribe button to get all the notifications as we continue to make content for all these amazing EVs. Thanks for watching. See you guys in the next one.